When I'm walking down the
I do want to say to Doni and many of you in this room that over a very long career in this city, all of you have helped me and my colleagues tell the truth and to try to tell.
I may not look like you and you me, but
my head up.
I'm from South Carolina, so I just
gotta be you.
got it.
What does this event mean to you, Miss Peggy Morris?
Oh, my heart,
Happy 20th anniversary.
my heart is about loving up on my sisters. Do you know what it feels like to have your sisters in the room? John.
Gotta be me and dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. I am beautiful, I am blessed, but not just what you see in the flesh. I'm free from people, free from myself. There's a
The doctor lived next door to the janitor, to the reverend, and the lawyer. We were together. Now we get so high and mighty that you create stress for your society because you don't like poor black folks either. That's a health problem. Get yourself together so I can stop being taking care of geriatric people and get back to pediatrics. I thank you, Doni, for all you've done. Let's keep doing it all the more.
letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. And I dare you, I dare you, I dare you to be you.
First name's Doni, last name's Glover. Entered the winning for the long haul, baby. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Next up is Taisha Dupree Wilson and Gabriel Carter. Good morning. How are you? And welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Thank you for
Outstanding.
having us.
Huh?
Thank you for having us.
Oh, no, thank you for being here. So you want to talk about the Baltimore Black Sox? Want to get some history today?
Absolutely.
Well, when were the Baltimore Black Sox in play?
Well, they were in play in the early part of the 20th century. They're really going to come into fruition around 1912, 1913, and they will go probably to around 1935, 1936.
Joined by Franklin Lance. Hello, Reverend. I'm not used to calling you by your first name.
Good morning, Doni. Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well, sir. Good to see you.
Like to welcome you to the Emmy-nominated show. We need to perk up that energy, buddy. Praise the Lord. What you know about the Baltimore Black Sox, Frank?
Great team. One of many teams that played in the Negro Leagues in Baltimore from roughly 1913 to roughly about 1935, 1936. Won a Negro League championship. They are on the Hall of Fame in the National Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City. Great honor to Baltimore. Played in 5 different locations in the area.
Taisha, Gabriel, let's give you a chance. Were the Baltimore Black Sox the only Negro League team here in Baltimore?
So from what I know, and I'm fairly new to the organization, so I'm going to delegate to Taisha and Franklin to tell you all about it. But I know that they are the most notable one.
I know there was also the Elite Giants. They played here in Baltimore. Were there any others? Huh?
Exactly, Doni. Those are the 2 most notable, the Elite Giants and the Baltimore Black Sox. Now, you had a number of different players that played on other teams as well. Doni, you would remember Herbert Simmons. We currently have a museum in Owings Mills. Right, Bert Simmons. It's currently a museum in Owings Mills in his honor. We have Leon Day. Satchel Paige played on the team. Josh Gibson, Joe Gans, a number of different notable people. But the 2 most prominent teams are the Elite Giants and the Baltimore Black Sox.
So let's go back to some of those players. Who did you say came from Baltimore? Satchel Paige played in Baltimore?
Satchel Paige actually played a year for the Baltimore Black Sox. Exactly. So you have some very prominent names that played on the Baltimore Black Sox. We also talk about people like Leon Day. As you know, Doni, there's a park named in his honor. He was actually elected into the Major League Hall of Fame, not maybe a few weeks before he actually died. Josh Gibson, one of the well-known Negro League players, home run
He was
king.
the home run king.
Home run king, played on the Baltimore Black Sox. There was a player by the name of Joe Louis. There was a great player who was also a boxer, actually buried in Ashburn Cemetery, Joe Gans. And so,
No, let's start the cemetery. The one going to Cherry Hill.
The one going to Cherry Hill.
Mount Auburn.
Mount Auburn, thank you. Joe Gans.
And he was a boxing champ. Joe Gans played baseball too.
Joe Gans played baseball also. So businessman, boxing champ, baseball player. And Donnie, that's one of the main reasons why we want to lift these players up, right? So there was some great history, and not just the players, but also the owners, like Wallace Smith, who actually had a hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, right? So you have some great people. And one of the things that I've said, and I'm so glad that you have Dr. Dupree Wilson here from Coppin, who's doing some of the history for us. One of the things that I've pressed is we want to research these individuals, not just as baseball players. And Donnie, one of the things I love about you, and I've known you for years, you are a historian, right? And so when we talk about these individuals, let's not look only at baseball, but let's look at what's going on in society around them. So some of these players would have been first generation removed from enslavement, some right after failed Reconstruction, some right around 1896 in Plessy versus Ferguson. Some would have been alive 1925 when the KKK marched down Pennsylvania Avenue. And players like Doc Sykes were instrumental in changing how we look at juries in this country. So Donnie, the Scottsboro Boys, their initial conviction was an all-white jury. Doc Sykes led the appeal to say no, that conviction was unfair because they did not have a jury of their peers. There were no black people on the jury. The argument was that there were no qualified black people to serve on the jury. And Doc Sykes was saying, I am Howard educated, I am a dentist, I am a professional man, and there are other people like me who could have served, but you all purposely, intentionally kept us from serving. That went to Supreme Court. That conviction was overturned on that point. And it led to us looking at how we appoint juries, that you do have the right to have a jury of your peers. So I've pressed, and Dr. Dupree Wilson and her team are looking. We want to look at these individuals not just as who they were as baseball players, but some of them were World War I vets. Some of them were instrumental in civil rights. And we want to look at them holistically as people.
Well, let me just jump in here. Let's clarify the Scottsboro Boys. Those were 9 black male teenagers accused in Alabama of raping 2 white women in 1931.
Right.
Also, you mentioned Joe Gans. I wanted to insert this. My understanding is that Joe Gans was the first black person with an automobile here in Baltimore.
So I've heard that as well. We have not verified it, but I've heard that as well. But he was extremely well known, a very prominent figure. So I would not doubt that. We've not yet verified it, though, Donnie.
Dr. Wilson.
Right. But it's I'm glad that you bring that point up, because during the time that we're discussing, anything that an African American possessed that even remotely looked at, signaled to luxury or any type of, prominent lifestyle was a source of envy for a lot of people. Doc Sykes being a dentist and also fighting for the Scottsboro Boys, and also, against voter suppression, because remember, we get our juries from the voting pool. So voter suppression during this time is twofold. It's not just to keep black folks out of the ballot box, but it's also to keep them from jury selection. So for me, it really helped to center these men as men and not just as ball players. And also the fact that during this time, you had no choice but to be involved in civil rights activism, because the tentacles of Jim Crow laid into every single part of your life. Whereas now some ball players can use their money to isolate themselves from certain situations. Back then, that was not the case. So,
well, this is going to be fun, Dr. Wilson. Now, my understanding, now how does this fit into the storyline that Baltimore had are you from Baltimore, Dr. Wilson?
I am not. I'm from Philadelphia.
Okay,
So
we love Philly.
Yeah,
But my
Donnie, we love her anyway.
no, it's okay. We're going to let you slide. But I understand that Baltimore had the largest population of free blacks prior to the Civil War, which
Yes.
one of my mentors explained to me is the reason behind the Negro dilemma, Gabriel, what to do with all of these black people. And we're still feeling, Reverend Lance, the effects of that beginning and still in Roland Park today.
Yeah, well, we have the Roland Park Water Tower and that whole drama that's currently taking place in Donnie. One of the things to which you alluded just a moment ago when you were talking about the Black Dilemma, one of the reasons that the Baltimore Police Department is actually a state force was this fear during the Civil War that you had this number of black people in Baltimore City, and that you needed to ensure that you had, if this group was to arm itself and quote unquote revolt, right, they could overturn the city. And so, we have to have state control here. It's one of the reasons that Baltimore City and St. Louis are the only two cities in the country that are not part of a county, right? So this whole idea of we need to ensure that we have control. And it was taking place, and we saw it in the Negro Leagues.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's why Baltimore is not in the county.
One of the reasons there was this huge issue of, and you're seeing it play out, really, Donnie, when you look at what's happened in the census over the past 70 years since 1950. Baltimore City was 949,000 people in 1950. It's roughly 575,000 today, with the population dropping precipitously. And what the numbers have shown for the most part is that the people have left the city proper, but on the periphery of the city. And this whole idea of, we want to make sure that the city does not have such prominent control by way of African Americans. And so you've seen this population shift, this quote unquote white flight. We've seen this historically now for some number of years.
So Dr. Franklin, what happened to your name? Okay. Franklin, then explain to me why black people fell for the okie doke, number one, with question P some years ago, which eliminated the 3-member districts and created then 14 individual city council districts. And then most recently, the term limit legislation, which limits a person's presence on the city council for only 2 terms. How could we then vote for something that cuts our own throats?
So Donnie, again, you and I have known each other for a while, and we love to have this discussion. The foundation of your question assumes an educated and informed electorate.
Right.
And I think that right there is a fallacy. For the most part, people elect based on or vote based on limited knowledge, both of candidates running for office and on issues on the ballot. And they take what someone has said about it without really digging into it. Now, Donnie, I also wear a hat where I lead a church. And I raised that because in times past, our churches were centers of education, right? They were centers. Dr. P. Wilson talked about civil rights. They helped lead movements. When the Great Migrations took place, the waves of Great Migrations, people left the South and they would stop at a church, and the leader of the church would say, I'm going to tell you, here's where you're going to go for a job, and here's where you're going to go for a room, and here's where you're going to go to get a meal. And the point was, they were places where they gathered and talked about issues.
Yes.
Donnie, I raised that because that kind of thing isn't happening today. Mm-hmm. We are not gathering people at town centers and discussing issues and having informed electorates. We're allowing people to go to their own devices with, and I'm using this word in its radix and its root, with ignorance, with people not knowing what's going on. And then we wonder, well, how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean to you, Gabriel?
Yeah, well, in relation to this project, in relation to everything happening in Black culture, I think it's important for us to have a lot of Black spaces as well as Black role models to look up to look back on, to have our shared history.
Well,
And to
Gabriel, that's all I was telling Facebook. And then next thing I know, they blocked my page, Franklin. I had 200,000 followers, and they put me in this thing, Gabriel, called Facebook jail, and took my 200,000 followers. All I was doing was talking about this very same thing right here. What's going on, Gabriel? They pushed the old man at this juncture off Facebook. And don't worry, because I found me TikTok.
So Donnie, so we may have freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean it comes without consequences. There are people, and we're seeing it now on quote unquote X and on Meta and others, where people still want to censor what we have to say. You know,
it wasn't like I said, kill all the white people. I don't believe that. I wasn't raised in hate.
But,
Well,
Donnie,
but nowadays, whenever you express an opinion that asserts any level of Black empowerment or brown empowerment, people see you as a threat. And that's why I always say some of the leaders that I say we as in mainstream have kind of recreated and whitewashed would have not survived on X and Facebook and all these other platforms, because they were about real life and voter education, to Dr. Lance's point. And even Septima Clark and, you know, all of the amazing people that utilize the Black church for voter education. Those institutions and also efforts are not as prominent as they used to be, as prevalent as they used to be. You know, you went through a time where African American voter blocks, and I don't even like to say block because we're not a monolith, but we were a sophisticated voting bloc. We knew we wouldn't get everything we wanted at the voting booth, but we knew that we needed to be in there to get some level of, you know, even if it's, you know, piecemealing things at a time. And I think it's very important that we utilize, you all mentioned the Baltimore police. They wouldn't even allow Black police officers in Baltimore to carry guns until after the 1930s. So, you know, even at its foundation, there are a lot of systems here in the city that have really, you know, not helped to buoy Black liberation or Black rights. And that's why I think, you know, even the Baltimore Black Sox to me serves as a symbol of what could be possible in a time where people were telling you that you have no value, at a time when people were telling you you're only supposed to be a ball player, you're only supposed to be a janitor or whatever. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor or a maid, but that's not all that we can be. So,
Frank, we had a little feedback, so I found the mic is yours. So, Dr. Wilson, tell me more. Tell me about Septima. Who was she?
Well, Septima Clark was an activist, and one of the things that she believed in is establishing what she called citizenship schools. And basically, these citizenship schools were designed to teach Black people how to pass literacy tests, because as you know, prior to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, African Americans would be subjected to voter suppression when going to vote. Those devices that they would use would include a ridiculous literacy test that even people with 4 and 5 degrees can't pass. Or it would be, you know, the jelly bean, count the number of jelly beans in the jar, bubbles in a bar of soap, and all of those devices.
But Dr. Wilson, how smart do you have to be to vote for Orange Man?
Well, we know that intelligence is not always tied to our vote. We know that, right? You know, some people will.
Well, 150 million Americans think Orange Man, number one, should be alive. 2, that he shouldn't. I mean, because he committed treason, and of all of the movies I've seen, they shoot someone guilty of treason. They shoot him dead.
Yeah.
Had Black people stormed the Capitol, as we saw the Trumpsters do on January 6th, the Reverend knows they would have been shot dead. So how 150 million Americans still vote for this person? I mean, he makes me lose my religion.
Well, I think a lot of it is, again, we've seen this since Reconstruction, where you have, white folks voting against their own,
Yes.
interests because they're rooted in what I have. Although I could be allied with the African American population because we may have some similar circumstances financially. I still have my whiteness as the trump card, no pun intended, over them. And I think a lot of times people don't see the bigger picture. All they see is their rage in that moment. And unfortunately, some people vote against their own economic interests for the purposes of, trying to hold on to, principles that are not, are anti-African American, anti-woman, anti-everybody. So,
Dr.
it's
Wilson,
yeah.
this show comes to you live from Sandtown. I am but 2 blocks from historic Pennsylvania Avenue. And I'm here to tell you, ever since Freddie Gray happened, it started up there where Reverend Lance's church is, Mount Lebanon, up there around Mondawmin. That's where the whole thing kicked off. Not that his church had anything to do with it. Of course not. He's been a staunch supporter of community, working with Mondawmin and various other things, parks and people. But today, actually last year, 2023, here in Sandtown, a 99.9999% Black community, I found a white woman in my alley eating off of the ground. And I said, ma'am, this is 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Ma'am, you've got to get out of here. You can't stay here. She called me an effing N-word. How does a person eating off of the ground call a homeowner a effing N-word? And I didn't lose my cool. I was so proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But you're eating off of the ground. How can you still be angry at me over the Civil War that your people lost?
Well, one thing that I always tell my students is don't attempt to put logic on white supremacy and racism. It is illogical. It makes no sense. And when you try to put logic on it, all you'll do is give yourself a headache. So if white supremacy and racism makes sense to you, then there's something wrong. It shouldn't make sense. And that's the biggest lesson I always try to impress upon my students, because again, you would think that you would ally with someone that has similar interests to you, especially when it relates to your well-being. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. People can't see the bigger picture sometimes. So it shouldn't make sense.
She still felt empowered enough to say that slick stuff out of her mouth. Now, the old me, there would have been a different story. But Gabriel, now tell me your background, Gabriel. Where are you from?
I grew up in PG County. My family's originally from North Carolina.
What does this discussion mean to you?
Well, I think it highlights the importance of staying educated, the importance of our history, the importance of having community spaces where conversations like this are happening, and memorials that we can visit to learn about our history, and be empowered to make decisions from a place of education, patience, and grace.
What does that mean? That sounds nice.
Well, I think when you're dealing with the face of ignorance, it's important for the role models to make sure that we're not acting on impulse, but we're acting from a calm response in the face of things that are sent to set us off. I think that really separates us as being a higher class of individual who can maintain our composure and move from a place of well-being for ourselves, even in the face of ignorance.
Well, now, Gabriel, I got to challenge you. Are you telling me you could have walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with people throwing rocks at you? Because I'm going to tell you, I couldn't have done it. I would have jumped out the line and we're going to be fighting. I'm just telling you, that's the North Avenue in me. That's the fighter. Which
Mr. Glover, you could have done it. I mean, you would have been wired differently.
Oh no!
No. Let me just say this, because whenever I do my lunch counter sit-in education at Coppin, and I show the beautiful and amazing work of Reverend Jim Lawson, and I have my students watch this video, and they'll say, "Oh, that wouldn't have been me because I would have done this and that." Here's the thing: when you have no choice, when you're in a Jim Crow world, you would have been wired differently, and you would have realized. Do you honestly think I could have sent my 6-year-old into a segregated Louisiana school the way Ruby Bridges' parents did? But at that time, people felt as though if I don't do this, who will? So I think that you could have done it, honestly. You would have been wired differently, and you felt as though Jim Crow has to die. And if I don't do it, who will? I can tell by your passion that you could have done it, honestly.
I don't know. I done read too many stories about Denmark VC, about Nat Turner, about King Miguel, King Bayano.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I got to plug my book, I Am Black Wall Street. Make sure you get it up on the screen there. Because we talk about the various freedom movements and how Black Wall Street is really birthed out of a freedom movement.
Yes.
I was talking with a person yesterday from New Jersey, sharing with them how in my book, I write about New Jersey, Burlington Island, known as the cradle of emancipation. Who knew? Who knew that Baltimore had more free blacks than any other city prior to the Civil War? Who knew that segregation started right here in Baltimore over there in Roland Park? There's so much about our history that's been hidden from us and that we just don't know. And then maybe sometimes the things that are too difficult to understand, Reverend Franklin Lance, maybe these things are the things that we struggle with the most, understanding who we are. I mean, I understand that my grandfather had to leave South Carolina because he did, in fact, shoot a white man. And it happened in your families, too. Y'all got some radicals. I can see it all in your blood.
So, Donnie, I think this conversation brings up some interesting points, right? And I think Dr. Dupree Wilson was talking about how we may have been different. And you did talk about some of the freedom movements that were taking place. You also caused me to think about 1963 and the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, that literally the teenagers and young kids had to leave because some of the adults were fearful about their jobs and their homes. I think the issue for me as I look at 2024 is really one of better information. So Carter G. Woodson, I love what he was trying to tell us in 1926, that we're not being educated, that we're being indoctrinated, right? And in this indoctrination, we're being taught that we are inferior to and dependent upon others. And I would love for us to have things in place that start changing that. And that's what this work that Dr. Dupree Wilson is trying to do, this work that we're trying to do in the Baltimore Black Sox. We want to lift up this kind of information and honor them by talking about how dignified they were, how professional they were, how involved in activists they were, right? There's so much that we don't know. And Donnie, you and I've talked for years. Baltimore has this rich history of the Thurgood Marshalls and the Billie Holidays and the Cab Callaways, right? How Thurgood goes down to Howard and is taught there how to overturn separate but equal. But I argue that we don't teach this, right? These are things that Dr. Dupree Wilson does. This is her career, right? Tenure track professor. But Donna, we don't talk about this in normal conversations. You have your radio program and you bring on guests, and I run a church, but by and large, I don't think this is the kind of information that we're sharing. And I think we end up birthing new generations that have no idea.
Right.
They can't talk about 1896 and Plessy versus Ferguson. They can't talk about Reconstruction, right? They can't talk about the 14th Amendment. They don't know. And I think, Donna, the onus is on us to teach.
Well, we're going to do some teaching here today. Come on, Dr. Wilson. You look like you have a whole syllabus in front of you.
I do, because as you all are talking, I'm thinking about what Reverend Dr. Lance is saying. I think there should be no reason why you grow up in Baltimore and not know who Lily Carroll Jackson is. And I have students that come into my classroom, they have no idea who she is. And I said, you know who Reverend Dr. King is? Yeah, well, that was his mentor. And when he would come to Baltimore, he would go to her house, sit in her kitchen and get advice from her. But the reason why she did not receive the level of attention that Dr. King got is because she didn't have the benefit of television. You know, she was the mother of the civil rights movement in Baltimore during the 1930s and 40s. So for me, I feel as though we need to unearth those hidden gems that are right under our noses. You know, Juanita Jackson Mitchell, her daughter, the first Black woman to be licensed to practice law in the state of Maryland, you know, and of course, Clarence Mitchell. I mean, these are folks that we should know. They should be on, you know, the tip of our tongue. But unfortunately, all of this beautiful and amazing history in Baltimore, and I know I'm a Philly girl, so, but I still have an appreciation for Baltimore history. It needs to be illuminated. And this is if we don't do it, who will? You know,
let me help you feel a little more comfortable. What's that lawyer up in? No, he wasn't a lawyer. Octavius is his name. Who is Octavius?
Octavius from Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
That name, I don't know that name. I'm trying to think. Are you talking about? Say it one more time.
Octavius, his name. Philadelphia, Black man, Octavius.
This is pretty.
Octavius Cato. He was killed on election day. It was also the day the Philadelphia Black educator, baseball player, and civil rights activist Octavius V. Cato, C-A-T-T-O, was murdered by a white supremacist. There was also a famous Black lawyer up there in Philadelphia. I think his name was Cecil B. Moore.
Oh, absolutely. Cecil B. Moore. He was the president of the NAACP. He was also unapologetic activist. Was always smoking on television. He always had a cigar with him while he was doing press conferences. And one of the things that I love about Cecil B. Moore is that he was, as we call today, unapologetically Black at a time when people were being told to suppress your Blackness and your pride in being a Black person. So Cecil B. Moore, one of the things I also love about him is that he saw the benefit of media. You know, nowadays, first thing a lawyer wants to do is get in front of cameras and on the radio. Well, that is out of the playbook of Charles Hamilton Houston and Cecil B. Moore and a lot of the others. So with Cecil B. Moore, he would ally with Black radio, because at that time we didn't have X and Facebook, but we had Black radio, which is the most immediate medium that you can have in the 1950s and 60s. So he became best friends with a lot of the Black DJs, and he was able to get his message out about protesting Greyhound bus station who would not hire Black drivers, or trying to desegregate schools. So
see, Dr. Wilson, this is where me and you might have to fight, because you are one who believes that we are not a monolith. Now, granted, some of us have more conservative views, some of us have more liberal views, but we have a common enemy. Doesn't that make us a monolith?
No, and I say that because, first of all, I'm a Pan-Africanist, so I believe that we all share cultural similarities, and I believe that we are a community. That's different from being a monolith. A monolith means that we all think alike. We all have the same exact perception of life. And I'm telling you, when I applied to college, you know, in the 90s, it wasn't a thing to go to a Black school. We were beat up for applying to Black colleges. Everybody's Black, everybody's the same. When I got to Howard University, everybody was not the same. A California person is not the same as a Philly person, not the same as a Black British person or a Black person from Australia. So I say all that to say that although we are, you know, Pan-Africanists and we're a community, and we all have similar interests and enemies in some cases, that does not mean that each of us has the same ideological outlook on life. That's what I mean when I say monolith.
Well, when I think of what happened to the Black people in Australia, a story that's rarely discussed, they went through even worse stuff than we went through, Franklin. I mean, castrations, mass castration. The way those British people did the Aborigines, those beautiful Black people in Australia, was just horrible. I mean, we went through some stuff. Australia Black people went through some stuff too, and they Black.
But so, Doni, to your point though, and Dr. P. Wilson was talking about this by saying that we're not monolithic. I would argue, Doni, that people don't see that we have a common enemy. There are there are a number of people. So Dr. Dupree Wilson talked about Pan-Africanism. There are a number of people of African descent that would say whatever issues that we're facing of our own causing, and not that there's some quote unquote common enemy out there. Keep in mind, we just recently overturned affirmative action. There was a justice on that court that took advantage of affirmative action that then voted against it. So there are a number of people that don't see that we have a common enemy.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
Yes, sir.
A despicable human being. He right up there with Trump, him and his wife.
And so the point is simply that there are people of African descent who do not affirm that there is a common enemy.
No, he just hasn't been put in that situation. He forgot.
I don't know how he can forget, because he was a part of the Black Power movement. And I think some people know better, but they're playing a game for financial gain. I honestly believe that there are some folks that know better, but they're playing a game in order to advance or, get some type of financial benefit. I won't buy that it's total ignorance on his part. I think it's like a wink, wink, that sort of thing. But it's just really, to your point, Dr. Lance, yeah, it is very sad.
I bet every Black woman in his lineage is just turning over in their grave.
Yeah.
What do you think there, young man? I don't want to leave you out of the conversation, Gabriel. I mean, how old are you, Gabriel? You look so young.
Thank you. I am 30. I feel like there are, a lot of names and conversations that I heard even in this session that I didn't know. And so that just shows me I need to continue to learn about my own history. I do think that the term Black experience is different for all of us. My Black experiences could be very different. I grew up in a religious household, but I don't necessarily have the same experiences as another Black person. So I think this sharing of history, the sharing of experiences is all something that we have to take part in, so that we can understand that the Black experience isn't just one thing, but we all have different experiences that can help guide the next generation.
Have you ever been called a nigger by a white person?
I have not. I know that I was racially profiled a few times. I know that I went to a predominantly white college, and when I was crossing campus, I was stopped and told that I was the neighborhood kids couldn't be on the campus, and I had to show my ID. There were experiences that I definitely had that showcased how race was an issue for other people. But again, my father, he always tells me not everything requires a response. And that's something that I hold very dear to me.
Yeah.
Have you ever been pulled over because you were Black?
No, but I've been in the car. I'll say yes. I wasn't driving, but I've been in the car while it was all of us were Black.
How did it make you feel?
Yeah, well, I don't like to assume that it's just because of race, but sometimes that is the case. I take it, there's a lot of patience and grace that it comes from my family, and growing up in a very religious household. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. A lot of people like to test your patience.
Test your patience. You should have grew up in Baltimore. They would test your left hook. They would see if you know how to box, because you got to fight. Franklin, did you have to fight in Baltimore City growing up?
Donnie, you and I grew up around the same people. You know the answer to that question. Look, Donnie, I wanted to circle back to something. So Dr. Dupree Wilson was talking, we were talking about Supreme Court Justice Thomas. For some people, it's an escape. So we might be in 2024, but we do have a history of some people of African descent trying to assimilate into the majority culture to escape the things that have happened to people of African descent, right? And so sometimes it's really just a matter of trying to get away. There's this phrase of being able to pass for white. And for some people, if you were in that position, they made a conscious choice that it was better, easier to do that. And what I'm getting around to is this whole idea of how hard we fought for integration. There are many people that argue that we lost a lot with integration. So I know we started talking about the Baltimore Black Sox. Purists in baseball say that the Negro Leagues ended the day that Jackie Robinson signed his contract.
Right.
So even though the league lasted another 13, 14 years, and the final season was 1960, 1961, baseball purists say the day that Jackie Robinson signed his contract and the Roy Capanellas and Satchel Pages and others realized that they could go to the Major League Baseball, that the Negro Leagues was never the same. And so I'm just raising that to say that integration, in a way, I know we fought hard, but in a way, there were some major losses that came about.
Dr. Wilson, was integration good for us?
There are pros and cons to integration.
That was a good answer.
One, and I know people look at me crazy when I say that, but as a historian, here's the thing. During the time of segregation, I will say one of the pros, if you can call it a pro, is we did have a more tight-knit sense of community, which meant that, like, for example, in Baltimore, we had restrictive covenants where Black people could only live in certain neighborhoods because, there were clauses in people's deeds that said you cannot sell to a Negro. Whether you are a physician or a janitor, you have to live in the same neighborhood, which means
or Frank Robinson.
Right. Your interests are the same as mine. But now that, we've integrated, you can live in the burbs. Only time you may go to the so-called hood is to go to church or to see your mom. So there's a disconnect in a lot of ways, I feel, as though now versus during the era of segregation, where I have to deal with these issues. And regardless of my socioeconomic status, I'm still a Black person in America. So I still have to deal with community issues, which means I have to be rooted and connected to, folks that may not share my education level and things like that. And that is one of the points, even with, the Richard Allens. That's what his point was. Regardless of how much money I have or the fact that I'm a free Black, until all of us are free, none of us are free. I'm not going to.
No. I'm sorry, Dr. Wilson. I live here in Green Spring Valley, and the African Americans I'm surrounded by, we really don't deal with those issues anymore. We've moved beyond the days of living in an impoverished state of mind. And my God, all of my friends are millionaires.
Right. And that's the mentality, unfortunately, for a lot of people. It's like, I made it. I got mine. Get yours. And that's a mistake, because I promise you, although you've made it, there's someone in your family that has not. And for me, I don't feel that we as a people have made it until all of us have access to the so-called American dream. But it's not enough for me to have it if you don't have access to it either. It's not, to me, I don't see that as a sense of accomplishment.
Dr. Wilson, over the past 50 plus years, we've been moving from West Baltimore to Woodlawn, Randallstown, Owings Mills.
Yes.
All of that's fine. I'm all for it. I halfway grew up in the county, but I always came, I still lived here in the city. And what I'm getting to is, it's almost impossible to convince an upwardly mobile Black woman, educated, making more than 60, 70 a year, to move back to the community. But you know who is moving back to the hood? White people.
Right.
Brooklyn, Harlem, DC, Baltimore.
Of course.
White people are my new neighbors.
Right.
So you're going to get white neighbors either way.
Yeah, but I think what we need to remind ourselves is that regardless of your economic status or the number of degrees you have on your wall, when they see you, what do they see? So for me, there's no difference.
I don't know, they start hitting the door, hitting the lock on the door.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. When I'm in the store, no one knows that I'm Dr. Wilson and 4 degrees, all that stuff. They see a Black woman. You know how many times I've been in Walmart and they're telling me, we don't take WIC in this line. or, our WIC machine is, you don't know what I need. You don't know who I am, but you've written my story for me based on the fact
Somebody
that
said that to you?
And I'm a Black woman. So.
Somebody said that to you?
Yes, and to my sister, who is a principal in Philadelphia. So for me,
I have never heard that story. Please.
Well, no, when you have sneakers and jeans on in Walmart, nobody knows who you are. And that's my point. It doesn't matter that there's a group of us that have made it, because the world sees me as a person of color, an African-American woman. And when I go into situations, even when you're going to get your hair products and you're being trailed through the store, they don't know that I'm not willing to risk my livelihood, my degrees, and my freedom for a $6 bottle of shampoo. They see, oh, well,
I wish I would catch somebody follow me around the store. I worked at Banana Republic. I will say it and I'll say it again. I had to quit that job because they told me right down at the gallery. That's why nothing good has come to the harbor, because of racism and bad karma. But Franklin, they told me I had to follow Black people around Banana Republic. I said, you done bumped your damn head. Now you are Ricerstown Road Plaza. You know who's doing all of the shoplifting? Them old white women.
Yeah.
But Donnie, it goes to the point that Dr. P. Wilson was making. The color of our skin is what people first see. And based on what they've been taught, based on their indoctrination, they make assumptions on that. As she said, no one knows about the number of degrees that hang on her wall. No one knows about the number of degrees that hang on my wall. What's in my bank account? I tell my son is 6'2", college educated. They don't know that about him. All they know is they see a 6'2" Black man.
Right.
Donnie, when we talk about Mike Brown, what did the police officer say? I felt intimidated. He was a big guy. Right? That leads. That's what leads with us.
Gabriel, 11 o'clock tonight. Harriet Tubman told us to meet her right there at the harbor. Are you going or are you not?
I'm supporting my people.
You hesitated too long. You'd have got left. I'm gone. I'm telling you,
I'm
Gabriel.
Johnny, I want to go back to this issue real quick about education.
She carried a code 45, Gabriel. She tell you be there at 11 o'clock. I suggest you be there at 10:50.
Gotta be early.
Yeah.
So Donnie, you've alluded to this a few times, but again, we must teach, right? 1937, the redlining map, the homeowners loan corporation map, which then became the map that set the precedent for that red, yellow, and green of what communities in which to invest and what not to. That started here in Baltimore. We all love to talk about August 28, 1968 and the March on Washington, but we missed that history. A. Philip Randolph wanted to do a march 20 years earlier and was going to do one under FDR, a march for jobs, because the New Deal did not include Black folk. And he wanted to do a march on Washington, but allowed himself to be talked out of it. And so 20 years later, they said, now's the time, which is why the signs there talk about both equal rights and jobs, because they combined the two when they did 1963. But Donnie, if we don't teach this history, I'm going to keep saying this, we will have generations and generations of generations who don't know the history, don't know the importance of the struggle, don't know about the struggle, and will not see a common enemy.
Oh, okay. So y'all so smart. How come you haven't taken this to the first Black governor, Westmore, and say, look here, first Black governor, we need to get this educational system here in the state of Maryland on par, because Gabriel is growing up not knowing about people like Tom Smith, a Black millionaire who lived in the 6600 block of Ricerstown Road at the turn of the 20th century and was the wealthiest Black man in the area. He was the largest Black hotelier in the United States. But all they want to teach us about is buckwheat, alfalfa, and Chicken George.
So Donnie, for me, I love one of the things that the NAACP has been trying to say for years, and that is all politics is local. He
want to get reelected. I say you can't make it no more local than that.
I think that this movement starts at the grassroots. I really, as a pastor, as a church leader, as a community leader, you talked about these things, Donnie. I hold those things. I'm not looking for top down. I'm saying to the people who are in the rank and file, we need to have movements. And so the Kobe Littles, the Joshua Harrises, the Donnie Glovers, the Frank Lances, I'm trying to push this stuff. And Donnie, as you know, though, a number of the people push back against us and say that. So Dr. Dupree Wilson talked about being Pan-African. I like to see myself as a Black nationalist. I am proud to be a Black man, but you have to be careful about that. People see that as a negative. We live in an era now where Dr. Golden resigned her position for defining privilege. Literally had to apologize first and then ultimately resign.
We take back that apology. We ain't apologizing for nothing. White privilege is white privilege, and you know it. And stop crying, wipe your nose, and be a man and be a decent human being. Our Black ancestors fought in every major war of this country. Still, they come home and get lynched. Have a seat, sir.
You need to go one step further. They were being lynched for wearing the uniform in which they fought.
Yes,
right?
In Maryland, there were over 40, I think I want to say 44 recorded. We know there were more than that. 44 recorded lynchings here in the state of Maryland. And I think we need to remind ourselves that these stories, although they may seem grim, need to be told at every single opportunity that we get. And I remember my mom, who's a preacher, she would be called like, oh, can you come and speak at this church or whatever? She's like, I'm so tired, but I have to go. And I'm like, well, if you're tired, tell them no. She's like, I can't say no because this is my opportunity to share my message. So when people call me to do speeches and things like that, even when I'm tired, I don't say no. Because
But you do send an invoice. But you do send an invoice.
Not always. And that's my problem. My husband's like, you do a lot of stuff for free, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. But the problem is, if we don't take those opportunities to educate people, we cannot wait for the public school system to do it.
So Dr. Dupree Wilson, we pay white people, but we won't pay each other. We have some things, Gabriel, we have to reverse and undo because a lot of times we're cutting our own throats. We will pay a white political person to help our campaign, but you want to come to Donnie Glover and think Donnie Glover gonna work for free. You gonna lose, and we're gonna beat this white cat you bring to us from Harvard or wherever else. We're gonna spank him for breakfast. How do we get back to loving and valuing and treasuring ourselves, Dr. Dupree Wilson?
I think we get back to it by reminding each other of who we are, and I think that's one of the issues that I have. We don't realize how amazing we are because a lot of us don't know our history. We see history as this abstract, dry thing, and it isn't. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I remember that scene in the movie The Black Panther when King T'Challa's fighting the people and his mother is on the side and screaming, show them who you are. We have to let people know who we are. We've been indoctrinated to believe that there's something wrong with having African heritage. There's something wrong with being African American, but we need to realize that that is not a handicap. It's our superpower. And if kids in Baltimore knew an ounce of their history, I promise you, they would not carry themselves in certain situations the way they do. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's up to us. I'm not waiting for anybody else to do it. This is my calling. If I don't do it, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it?
See, we need to go snatch Santa Lisa and the Secretary of Education and sit them in a room. Maybe it's over at Great Blacks and Wax. Because Gabriel, too many times, Michelle Madison, I don't know what comments you're making, but nothing is coming up. She's made anybody know Michelle? Okay, she's made a lot of, but no comments will come up. Gabriel, where do you want to go from here? What does all of this mean to you?
So for me personally, I think that like we've been talking about, there is warrior blood in me. There's a history of greatness that I need to understand and know about. I need places where I can go and learn. I need a return to community where conversations are being held that uplift me. I need storytellers to share. I need designers, Black designers, to share their art, their culture. I need all of this to be happening, and I need places where I can go and I can be a part of this conversation, whether that's a memorial, whether that's the Park and People's Campus, whether that's Coppin State. I need to know where I can go to be part of the conversation.
So, Gabriel, let me give you some history that you won't get in school. One is the first Black person that I've learned came to America in modern times was Juan Garrido, Garrido. He was a Spanish conquistador. He was not an enslaved African. Number two, we were not slaves. Slavery is a part of our history, but we were never slaves. We were enslaved, but that our history did not start nor end with that. Also, if you look up, now they'll tell you about the Indians who came to North America through the Bering Strait from Asia. Some say 12 to 15,000 years ago. I'm going to tell you to look up Luzia, Luzia, in Brazil. Type into Google, Luzia, Luzia, and Brazil, and you will see the bones of a Black woman who was 14,000 years old. So when they tell you that Black people came here in the bottom of a slave ship by some lost guy named Christopher Columbus, I will tell you about the Moors who dominated the Iberian Peninsula, that's Spain and Portugal, for 800 years just prior to the slave trade. There's so much about our history that they don't even know. So it is imperative that you know, so no idiot can come up to you and tell you where you come from. Any final thoughts, Reverend?
That was it, Donnie, that we need to focus on education. And again, I mentioned earlier Carter G. Woodson, second man to get a PhD in history from Harvard. His landmark work, 1926, The Miseducation of the Negro. His point simply was that we're not being educated, but indoctrinated. We have to change that 180 degrees, and I think the onus falls on us.
Dr. Dupree Wilson, any final thoughts?
Well, sure. I think one of the things that we need to focus on is, of course, illuminating stories of our hidden gems. You know, we know the Dr. Kings, we know the Harriet Tubmans, we know the Frederick Douglasses, but there are so many unknown stories that we need to start to illuminate, because those opportunities to share information will resonate with people and also give them a bit of a swagger that they may not have had before. You know, you talked about slave revolts and things like that. A lot of the slave revolts failed because of people running at the last minute, telling the authorities, "Oh, this
snitches.
is what we're planning." Snitches,
the real snitches.
Right, exactly. But the fact that there was a slave rebellion every single year dispels the myth that Black people chose slavery and that we were totally fine with being oppressed and indoctrinated. But we need to illuminate those stories.
Gabriel, do you know the most successful slave insurrection in the Western Hemisphere ever?
I do not.
Yes,
educate me.
It's the Haitian Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
The Haitians are the strongest Black people in the Western Hemisphere. They kicked Napoleon in the ARSE. Kicked him out. Nowhere else in the Western Hemisphere has that type of overthrow of slavery ever happened. Look up the pictures of the Haitian Revolution. Everything you will hear about Haiti in your lifetime, Gabriel, will be negative because they don't want you to know how powerful Black people are. And we don't just speak English. So a lot of our history is in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and the multiple African dialects. Come on, take us home, Rev. We need some prayer. Take us home with some prayer.
You want me to close us in prayer?
Yes, sir.
God, we thank you for this opportunity, for allowing us to gather. We thank you, God, for this discussion. We hope that somebody has been helped, that somebody has been healed, that somebody has been made better because we were able to come in dialogue. Now, God, lift us all, build a hedge around us, keep us. And God, we will be so careful to give your name and only your name praise. We thank you. This is the day that the Lord hath made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning, world.